Whether great recreations of previous source material or downright popcorn buckets of cash grabbing shit, remakes come and go all of the time with, you might hope, the aim of giving new generations the fantastic experiences we had growing up with a more contemporary appeal, whether that be films, TV shows or video games, and to give existing fans an updated and hopefully improved version of their beloved favourites, adding something new to the existing material while scratching that nostalgic itch. Whether you are one of these people who hate all things remake and consider the world to have no more originality than an edgy character on a poster with a quote they definitely did not say, or you are open to giving younger creators the keys to the ship to reinvent and modernise classics, I think we can all agree that for better or for worse, there is no stopping the corporate money train on recashing those checks from decades ago. Therefore, I was surprised but not necessarily shocked that EA have announced their next business venture in this world we call entertainment, a remake of Dead Space. Now I'm here to talk video games, not video game company politics and opinions on dismissing a whole development team of an original classic to then take their IP and monetize on its success with a remake. I'm sure there are other videos for that, but one thing that did amaze me with this remake announcement is that the original Dead Space, developed by Visceral Games and published by EA, is 14 years old this year. That means it was released in 2008 if you didn't fancy working that one out in your head. Now that phrase, it seems like yesterday, is just far too real, so I thought I'd take a look back at the original Dead Space to answer that burning question everyone is currently asking themselves. Do we even need a Dead Space remake? Well, I'm glad you asked, let's find out, but first, welcome to the broadcast. My name is Naj, and if you like this video, why not give it a thumbs up, tell me what you think of the remake in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel to catch all my upcoming videos. Thanks a bunch.
Isaac, it's me. I wish I could talk to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about everything. I wish I could just talk to someone. It's all falling apart here. I can't believe what's happening.
In the world of video games, there are a number of aspects to take into consideration as to what makes a good remake. This new console generation saw the launch of Demon's Souls Remake, which had a huge graphical overhaul with the new PS5 hardware, but the game was pretty much identical everywhere else, including some data design and control. A remake on a presentational scale, which is fine if you just want to revisit a classic on modern hardware. Some games may not even need updating in their mechanics, and a graphical uplift is just all we need. Before that, we had the Final Fantasy VII Remake, in which the graphical uplift, although impressive, was the least of the changes in that game, as we had complete gameplay shift from turn-based combat to real-time combat, a universe expanded upon so much that they're having to divide the entire experience across multiple games, and a story that takes some new directions and subverts the player expectations in such a way, you wonder if it is even still a remake at all, or an entirely new game simply wearing the original's name pinned to its jacket.
You better be worth the money, Merc. Every last gill.
This all gives the word remake a very loose meaning, and don't even get me started on the differences between remastered, reboot or remake. I mean, I don't even know if developers know what the difference is when putting these labels on their games. But going by EA's reveals, their plans to rebuild Dead Space are from the ground up, vocally confirmed as a project inspired by Capcom's success over the years with their various Resident Evil remakes. With that in mind, I feel there is one major factor at play with regards to that franchise's success that could be lacking when it comes to Dead Space, affecting the potential success of the upcoming remake. Now, I won't pretend to know the first thing about game development or the ins and outs of technological advancements, but from a player point of view, revisiting the original Dead Space has shown me it has aged incredibly well, and from a gameplay mechanic perspective, the difference in video game evolution isn't as drastically apparent as when compared to the original Resident Evil games and their respective remakes. And I think this is where the Dead Space remake will struggle to differentiate itself from its predecessor. Now, remakes should want to invite new generations to existing material, therefore this video will be relatively spoiler free for a lot of the endgame story of Dead Space, but be warned, I will be talking about the story setup, my opinions on the whole thing, including the final boss, but without much narrative context. Reason being is to encourage players who missed out on this game to join the discussion, and if anything, convince them to perhaps still give the original a go, as it is still very much accessible, including via Xbox Game Pass. Dead Space is a third-person survival horror game, think Resident Evil in space, with a bit of Aliens and Event Horizon thrown into the aesthetic and lore. Coincidentally, Dead Space was inspired by the Resident Evil games that came before it, so clearly there is a trend here with copying the smart kids' homework. But Dead Space differentiates itself from that franchise enough, and it was welcomed by a glowing reception from both players and the critics, and it stood on its own 2 feet, spawning its own franchise. Its success led to comic books, movies, various games including 2 mainline sequels, one of which was praised as a worthy and improved follow-up, another that, well, wasn't and effectively dismembered the Dead Space franchise. Whether the upcoming remake will revitalise the franchise does remain to be seen. So, a little bit about the story. We take control of Isaac Clarke, a mechanical engineer whose team have been assigned a mission to investigate a complete communication blackout aboard the USG Ishimura, a planet cracker ship occupied by miners and scientists, one of which is Isaac's girlfriend Nicole.
So that's Ishimura. Impressive.
The USG Ishimura, biggest planet cracker in her class. And it looks like they already popped the cork.
Their mission is to make communication with the ship and repair any damages, and to get the ship and team operational. Upon their arrival, it is clear things are not as simple as damages to their communication methods, as the ship appears derelict, occupied by very few crew, at least in their normal human state. The ill-fated Ishimura crew have transformed into some kind of alien life form known as Necromorphs, zombie, alien-like creatures whose minds are lost and bodies have morphed into various forms, all having the traits of twisted limbs, which soon becomes apparent this is their weakness. Interesting fact, the designs of the Necromorphs were reportedly inspired by images of victims of horrific car accidents, how their bodies can be morphed into twisted states after high-speed collisions. That's pretty twisted in itself, but it certainly gives the Necromorphs a unique look, and a foe that gives the game its own identity, separating it from the abundance of generic zombie games.
Run, Isaac! Get the hell out of there!
After some exploration and questions like what the fuck is going on, we learn the crew discovered some kind of ancient relic called the Marker, whilst cracking into a planet searching for rare resources to take back to what is in this world a dying Earth, but instead they may have found its destruction. With the discovery comes the classic alien movie trope of the company men wanting to extort this find and take it back to Earth, whilst everyone else comes to the conclusion it was probably the worst idea since cracking into an unknown planet in the first place. The story for me is actually one area where I think the remake could improve upon this original quite drastically. The lore and setup itself is strong, much of it being told through audio, video and text logs found as you explore the ship. They add to the game's lore and increase the depth of our knowledge of the previous occupants of the ship and their intentions, as well as the history of the Necromorphs and Marker itself to some extent in this game.
What in God's name is going on down there?
I think that's precisely the point, Doctor. God's work.
I'm not so sure of that. We have to assume that the colony's problems are somehow connected to the Marker.
You can assume all you want to. I do not. The Marker is glorious and divine. You know that.
God moves in mysterious ways.
Anyway, we'll have it on board tomorrow. You can analyze it all you want to. What are you so worried about?
I really enjoyed the underlying themes of science versus religion, experimenting and researching for 2 very different reasons and beliefs. This helped mix up the formula and tone of the game fantastically, and this first game did grab my interest in this universe. However, as for the story and what is going on in front of us, basically get the hell off this ship and everyone alive with it, for me it suffers for a couple of reasons. Unlikable side characters and Isaac being a silent protagonist. I don't really have anything against silent protagonists if it fits the game's concept, such as creating your own character and journey, and they are a great way of allowing the player to reflect themselves onto a character, and I totally get that this is the point with silent protagonists. However, in a game with a set protagonist, I feel this hurts it very much, and it feels more of a cheap way out as opposed to a creative decision. I'm not saying that this is definitely the case here, perhaps the developers decided this is an artistic decision. Isaac does make a lot of moans and groans. He will get out of breath, grunt when swinging his fist or kicking his feet, and make a wild bunch of noises when getting hurt, but he doesn't say a word. I will admit it does add to the sense of isolation on the ship, but there are just so many one-sided conversations between Isaac and his colleagues, and a lot of it is just rehashing information we already know from the aforementioned audio logs. One example is the Marker itself. If you collect enough logs in the start of the game, you will learn about it quite early on, and then your mates are like, hey, so there's this thing called the Marker. It'd be cool to have Isaac acknowledge this, and if our own knowledge was implemented into the conversations. A lot of the time the characters are telling me about something I already knew, like, yeah, catch up bitch, that was yesterday's news.
Whatever is happening around here, it came from the planet when they cracked it open. It spread to the colony and reached the ship. Isaac, this isn't an infection. It's some form of alien life. Shit, we've got bigger problems.
And the characters that do interact with each other seem to have this kind of hate for each other. As a crew, you would have thought they'd be quite a close-knit group, but they just seem so tense from the start before everything even starts kicking off, like there is some unspoken history there. I mean, if I talked to my superior like this, then I'd get the "hey, here's the door, you prick" escort out of the building.
Seems like everyone was trying to pack in a hurry.
There should be a security detail in here.
Yeah? Well, there's not. There's nobody here. I can't pick up any broadcasts.
That security console's still live. Isaac, log in and see what you can find. Kendra, get that elevator back online.
Power's dead. I can't.
Then reroute the damn power! Look, if we all cooperate, we can figure this out a lot sooner. Let's get that computer display up, Isaac.
There doesn't seem to be any reason for it other than everyone's just fed up and unnecessary conflict between them. And Isaac as the main character is just a regular guy, an engineer who ended up in this mess, and it frustrates me when he wouldn't get involved or even show how he was feeling, in a way that wasn't a screech or a blast from a plasma rifle. Especially when he sees some crazy shit for the first time, or when the story starts focusing on Nicole. Like, how is this affecting Isaac? Isaac in the sequels was fully voice acted, which added so much more characterization to the character, rather than just being a soulless anchor to get from point A to B. And I think going back to the silent protagonist route after the sequels have personified the character would be a huge mistake, and thankfully voice actor Gunnar Wright, who played Isaac in the sequels, will be reprising his role in the remake. What is strange though is that the developers have said a weird comment on this, about that Isaac will talk a little, but not much more. And take a look at this statement that was released for rules for Isaac's dialogue. Number 1, Isaac will primarily only speak when spoken to. And number 2, Isaac will sometimes speak in a situation where it would feel weird if he remained silent. What the hell does that even mean? It's either a voice acted character or not, and I think by giving Isaac a more active role in the story and with the other characters, this will add a layer of depth to him as a relatable character, and this is something the story is missing with the original Dead Space. And only spoke when spoken to? I mean, time will tell, but this intertwines nicely with the level design of the game in that it becomes a bit too fetch quest heavy, especially towards the end. Isaac do this, Isaac do that. And by saying he's only going to speak when spoken to, I mean, Isaac, get this, get that. Okay, whilst everyone else just sits there comfortably like a bunch of lemons talking to you via transmissions. And let me tell you, those bloody transmissions popping up are the biggest jump scares of the game.
Isaac, are you there?
Every bloody time it would get me. And speaking of scares and moving on from the story, Dead Space is a horror game, and when I think of decent horror, nothing is scarier than atmosphere. Something that arguably deteriorates over the course of time when it comes to our favourite video games. The atmosphere is created in the accumulation of graphical fidelity, sound design, world and level design, and within our favourite games this can sometimes be lost in time due to them becoming dated. Technology advances therefore, as do our games, and this is very evident with the Resident Evil games. Look at these images. What scared me as a child seems pretty laughable now, although admittedly some of the atmosphere has retained in a weird sort of way with these games. Which is how you know they are good horror. Unlike its crew though, the atmosphere of Dead Space is still very much alive, due to all of those aforementioned components coming together nicely like a synchronised bukkake party. Visually, the game still holds up pretty well, at least in dimly lit rooms. Just like that bird you met at 1 AM though, it does look a little tacky once the lights are turned on and it's just the two of you left in the middle of the dance floor. Textures of scenery, character models and Isaac's suit in particular look pretty flat in their detail. However, this doesn't really matter, it is the aesthetical design that makes the game hold up today and retain its appeal. The Ishimura is a dark and deadly setting for the game, and it reminds me of a larger, more industrial Nostromo from the movie Alien. The ship almost seems alive in itself too, with how it creaks and growls with the distant sounds of machines and mechanisms to keep this thing pumping. helps in preserving the looming sense of fear and anxiety of what lurks around the corner, as the sound design is excellent, from the wretched cries of the Necromorphs, the chugging of the ship, the faint singing in the air of the crazies in the distance of the ship. Or is it in Isaac's mind? It plays tricks on you. Or does it? Well, that's the beauty of it. Flickering lights, rustic corridors, smoke seeping from the pipes. There is beauty in the destruction, and it creates a very memorable setting. The bodies piled up, bags on their faces, shot in the head. The bloody splats of the insane crew banging one out on the walls. The ship is covered in scribbling, some readable, some cryptic, but all insane. Let me just say this. What the hell is it with bathrooms and horror games? Dead Space has a load of them and they always creep me out, the scariest rooms in the game. And not because nobody scrubbed these things in years. And in space, everyone can hear you drop the kids off to the pool. The ship is meticulous in its design, and it was a joy to explore today 14 years later. Looking at the little footage released of the new remake, it looks like they are going for a pretty loyal recreation of the original ship with what we have seen so far. And it looks good, but so does the original. Yes, it will run better with more frames per second, and it will likely have ray tracing and all that mumbo jumbo. It will look better side by side, of course it will. But as I said, the difference may not be so as dramatic as its brother from another mother, Resident Evil. The ship is pretty large in scale and has many different areas to explore as you progress through the game's 12 chapters. Medical bays, laboratories, executive suites. There is enough variety in the locations to keep the game feeling fresh, but it all feels like it fits nicely within the ship's overall design and never feels out of place, like, why the hell do we have this on this ship? Kind of like Rapture from Bioshock, a vast location, but it has a consistent theme and design throughout. I like it. Where Dead Space both honours its inspiration and separates itself from it is within its amazing gameplay, which is built around a unique combat system. Where zombies are normally killed with a few shots to the head, the extraterrestrial Necromorphs offer a more complex adversary and require a far more strategic defence. Shoot off their limbs. The only way to kill a Necromorph is to dismember it by using an assortment of weapons to shoot off their arms and legs. Shoot them in the body, they'll just keep on coming for you. This whole mechanic is extremely satisfying. There is a variety of enemies in the game that requires this precision method. You've got your standard necro guy that sprints at you, place a well aimed shot at the kneecap, to drop it to the ground it will scurry towards you until you shoot off its arm as well. Big bloaters that run faster than they can eat you, take them down and they'll explode, releasing a swarm of what can only be described as little octopuses that try and sit on and suck off your face. Skinny little runts that have huge explosive hands that you don't want to get close with even with a 5-foot pole. Strong brutes, these legless guys that have hench arms that take quite a few rounds to kill. Hey, obviously by the way I'm explaining these, I don't know what the different names of the Necromorphs are. I didn't get the encyclopedia, but I'm sure someone out there has it. But regardless of their names, they are fast, aggressive, and show no remorse as they too try to rip you limb from limb. Great enemy, and they help make Dead Space stand out of the crowd in a crowded genre. Mechanically speaking, the limb shooting system works very well in this game, and I'm interested to see where they take this in the remake and how they can improve upon it. I I won't deny once you have mastered this, which you will quite early on in the game, it does get easier to fight them as it may seem at the start, but that doesn't mean it gets any less awesome. The limbs usually have 1 or 2 points in which they will detach from the body, usually at the knee, so I'm curious to see if in the remake we will get a more accurate dismemberment system. Shoot one enough times in the shins, will it eventually work through the bone and detach there, or the thigh or the ankle? It would be pretty cool if we'll see this advance even further. And I think it needs to give the remake any sort of credit. And one thing I would like to see advanced with the enemies as well is the boss battles. Large monstrosities that use the same idea of shooting limbs, but they are usually gigantic tentacles that you need to detach. There are a few of these fights and they all pretty much have the same premise. Run from left to right, avoiding attacks and shoot the big orange thingy when you get a chance. Rinse and repeat. It's a little basic and it doesn't live up to the game's overall creative nature, which is a real shame. And of course you're not doing all the ripping with your hands, and as an engineer Isaac has an assortment of weapons that fit his style. He is not a soldier nor a trained killer, and the weapons at his disposal are pretty much tools he may use in his field of work. We start the game with a plasma cutter, which I'm guessing is used to cut through metals, but it coincidentally moonlights as a pistol that is pretty handy in close encounters of a fucked up kind. Every weapon has a secondary mode, and the plasma cutter can change from vertical to horizontal shots, which is incredibly useful when Necros come at you from all different angles. They can be coming out of the goddamn walls, the floors, the ceilings, through vents and crawl spaces, and you never know which angle you might need to pop off a shot in. However, whilst the plasma cutter is the default sidearm and useful for one-on-one business, there are plenty of other options for those who want a little more pack to their punch. The pulse rifle, which acts as your machine gun and is probably the fastest firing gun in the game, useful for little cretins that don't require much damage to kill. The contact beam, which takes a little time to charge up, but once it has, will fire a huge blast that will surely pulverise anything in its path. I mean, this thing is pretty mental, and I think it's fair to say this detaches bodies from limbs and not limbs from bodies. My personal favourite though is the ore cutter line gun. You get this pretty early on, but it is probably the only thing that is scarier on the ship than the Necromorphs. This is excellent against hordes of enemies and can take multiple limbs off at the same time with how wide each round is. This is probably the closest thing we get to a shotgun in the game, but the range is not an issue with it. Other weapons include a disc ripper, firing a spinning saw blade to cut through the limbs, which is pretty cool, and a flamethrower that, again, is okay for weak enemies, but to be honest, this was probably the most disappointing weapon in the game. I do love a good flamethrower, but I never really used it because it wasn't as effective as everything else. Hey, regardless of what you're using though, you gotta think it's pretty amazing how none of them tear through the ship itself, especially when they are designed to cut through metal and other objects, but hey ho, I mean, I suppose you gotta suspend your disbelief a little bit when playing a game about mind-controlled aliens. Weapons will get you most of the way, but there are other useful tools of the trade, and these are incorporated into Isaac's suit, which also acts as the game's HUD. Isaac's health and stasis bar are on his back, whilst the ammo counters are on the guns themselves, and the quest markers are activated by Isaac also. This allows for the game to have no clutter on the screen with a HUD, and I think this is genius how they have implemented all of the data a player needs to know into the character model itself. It is just another thing that adds to the immersion of the game, and it's fantastic. But the two tools Isaac has are Stasis Module and Kinesis Module. Stasis Module is used to slow things down, useful in combat to slow down those fast bastards so you can get the perfect shot, and the Kinesis Module is basically psychokinesis, the ability to move objects without touching them. You'll be picking up explosive canisters and other objects to launch at your enemies, giving them a one-way ticket to dead. When you're not fighting for survival, these are also used in exploration and puzzle solving. There are a few puzzles and mini-game-like quests in the game you have to overcome. These usually include moving some kind of mechanism into place or fixing something to get something going again to help you get out of this chicken shit outfit. I would say 90% of the objectives in the game are fetch quests, having to collect something to fix something to progress the story. Which makes sense seeing as Isaac is an engineer, however what the hell is everybody else doing? I mean, he might as well have just come on his own like you all do every night. The objectives can be quite repetitive and are in themselves dull. Despite the great gameplay and atmosphere, I did grow a little tired of every chapter literally being a fetch quest. It would have benefited from the ship being perhaps more explorable. It is a very linear path, and some smaller hub areas that offer exploration would have been welcome. Make you feel like you are in an unknown ship you can get lost in, which is part of the horror, rather than just following one path, which would also create opportunities for NPCs around the ship to interact with. Side quests maybe? Who knows, maybe in the remake. Many of the puzzles in the game take place in zero gravity, and these are by far the most tedious parts of the game and could be improved upon. Sometimes it can be quite fiddly to move where you want, as you can only go to certain surfaces and it can all be quite disorientating. But I guess flying through zero gravity in a blackout planet cracker ship probably would be. All of the weapons and tools can be upgraded through workbenches scattered throughout the levels, however in my opinion, the upgrading system, friggin' sucks. You have to collect nodes to upgrade weapons, which can also be used to open locked rooms, so you have to use the nodes strategically. Either upgrade weapons and tools, or unlock rooms with potential goodies inside like weapon schematics, ammo, health and so on. And this is a good system because it kind of adds a risk-reward factor to it. However, the actual upgrade system itself majorly needs reworking in the remake. You feel like you're wasting nodes because a lot of the slots for upgrades are blank, and you have to build the path towards them. This makes me not really want to upgrade too much and only stick to 1 or 2 weapons. And this may be the intention, but I want to experiment with other weapons. Even without opening locked rooms and focusing on weapons, you would probably only really be able to fully upgrade 2 or 3 weapons max due to many of the nodes being used to bridge the gap between the upgrades. There is a store in the game to buy ammo, weapons and nodes, but they are pretty expensive and I would rather buy weapons and suit upgrades. At the end of the game I did have a shit ton of credits, so I did buy a lot of nodes for some final upgrades, but it really didn't matter at that point because I was, well, at the end of the game. It just really dictated what I upgraded because I thought, well, if I go down this path, I'm only going to get that after using like 3 nodes. Is it really worth it? Which again, it's probably intentional, but it just felt like a waste to me. So, obviously I have a few gripes with Dead Space. It's not perfect with its poor characterization of Isaac, some tedious mission design and somewhat wasted attempt with an upgrade system, but I feel like these are just minor blemishes in what is otherwise a beauty of a game. The horror, the combat, the lore, everything else has matured like a good cheese and it's hard to fault it. Which leads me to the looming question. Is a Dead Space remake necessary? Well, there is room for improvement here. And for me, if the remake addresses these issues, then it could in fact be something special, but do we need the remake? Well, let's think of it another way. It's 11 PM, you're on your way to the club, your mate puts his arm around you and sweetly whispers, do we need another bag of cocaine? Scientifically speaking, the answer is no, but where's the closest fucking cash point, mate?